First, we need to know if the data that we have is good enough. And to do this, there are two tools that I like to use. If you've looked at structured data in the past, you may remember the structured data testing tool from Google. They donated that tool to schema.org, and it's now called the Schema Markup Validator. I like this tool because it's fast and it tells me if the structured data itself is valid. It's rare for me to see any warnings on here. I usually only see when there's an error in the code because they're looking at whether or not the structured data, the code itself is valid, not whether or not Google wants it like that. That's why I also use Google's rich results testing tool. But this one takes a long time to load and I'm impatient. So the rich results testing tool shows me similar warnings and errors that you might find in your Google Search Console. So that's why it's nice to have them both. But Search Console is at best a few days behind. Both of these tools can show me at this very moment what my structured data looks like and if there are warnings or errors that I should be concerned about. They're both free and you don't need an account to use them. You can even use them on your competitors' websites if you really wanted to, if that's something you'd like to check out. Now let's talk a little bit about Search Console and Google's rich results testing tool labels. They label their search enhancements with error, valid with warnings, or valid. The error means that Google will not read that set of information in the structured data and that action is required from you. Valid with warnings means that Google can see it perfectly fine, but there may be some information you could add if you have it. And then valid, well, that means it's good. Let's talk about the valid with warnings a little bit. Valid with warnings is like a heads up. If you have the information, can you add it? If not, okay, cool. That's totally fine. There may not be any action that you have to take with valid with warnings because Google can read the information. Errors, those are the ones that you should be concerned about. When there's an error on a particular set of data, Google will ignore that whole set of data. For example, you have an error on your product's price because it's required, then Google will ignore that whole product data entirely and you won't qualify for any search enhancement from that set. So when you see errors, it's a good idea to look into them, even if you have more than one set of data, because ideally we don't want to see any errors, but maybe it's not always that simple. So if you have an error, you're going to want to talk with your theme provider or talk with your developer to help you fix it. Now, Google search is smart though. If you have more than one set of structured data, Google will choose the most complete set of information. For example, this logo has 2 items detected. When you click on the logo, you're going to find that one of them is valid and the other has an error. As I mentioned, Google will ignore the set of data with the error and instead focus on the set that is valid or valid with warnings. So you could ignore this issue because you have one set of logo data that is good. Let's talk about some common warnings that we might see. The first is regarding reviews. So there are 2 different review fields that can be used, and both of these are optional. You should expect to see warnings for both the review and aggregate rating if you have no reviews on your product. Review companies don't always provide the structured data needed to qualify for search enhancements. Maybe that's because it's on a higher tier of their product offering, or they just don't know that it should be provided. But usually when a review provider does include the structured data for reviews, it's separate from the rest of your product data. And when they're separate pieces of information, you usually can get reviews or price and availability, but rarely all 3 of those, which you should be able to get. And that's one of the reasons why our app, JSON-LD for SEO, integrates with over 20 review providers. Now, if you have reviews, only the aggregate rating should be used. So you will still see that review field warning. The review field doesn't apply to Shopify products. It's for a critic review, which is where someone writes an article about maybe a business or a book or a movie. I want to expand on that a little bit Let's say you send one of your products to an influencer to write up an unbiased review. So they write up a review on their website about your product, and they say it's 4.5 stars as shown in this result for the 7 best shower tile cleaners of 2022. That is a critic review. For product reviews, you should only use aggregate rating. The aggregate rating gathers all of the reviews for a particular product on your site, aggregates the ratings, and comes up with one final review rating. The risk of using the review field is that Google may show the reviewer's name and only show their rating instead of the aggregate of all of the reviews for that product. So then we have warnings for things like SKU and no global identifiers such as gtin or MPN. These warnings show up for 2 possible reasons. One, you haven't set up a SKU or a global identifier for your products. Or 2, your theme isn't showing the information in your structured data. If you have these set up in Shopify, make sure that you include them for all of your variants, not just the main product. If you're using Facebook, Google Merchant Center, or ads in general, you need to have the gtin or MPN, as those are going to be required fields. And if you're not using Facebook, Merchant Center, and don't want to add this SKU, gtin, or MPN, then you can just ignore these warnings. It's fine. Because again, valid with warnings, Google will still see it and they will still give you the results that you do qualify for. So here's a few things that can positively affect your search enhancements. Having a moderate amount of text content on the page is really important. I usually recommend between 200 and 500 words of unique content, though more is always going to be better. Product reviews must be sourced directly from the customer. You can't manually add testimonials on your products or your homepage. Those don't count towards the eligibility of a review snippet. That's why having a review app is so important for your search results. So if you do want to qualify for the review rich results, you need to get a review app if you don't have one. Having at least one error-free set of structured data per type. Errors can block that set of data from being read completely. So having at least one error-free is really important. And then ensure that all of your possible variants and product options are listed both visually on the page and in the structured data. For example, a variant should have their own price, availability, product condition, all that stuff. All of that needs to be in the structured data as well. Even more specifically, each product and variant should have a unique URL in the structured data. Notice that the variant URL includes the question mark variant equals and then a number. This is incredibly important for Facebook and Merchant Center and a common cause for price mismatching errors within Merchant Center. And then finally, using JSON LD for your structured data, as this is the preferred method from search engines. There's going to also be a few negative factors that will slow things down for you. The first is missing structured data, such as having no FAQ data at all. That'll prevent you from qualifying for an FAQ-rich result. There may be some themes that have some of what you need for products because Shopify required themes to include that product data, but that may not be the case for other pages across your site. Changing your URL structure can cause you to start over on your SEO. This is most often seen with collections because Shopify uses collections / collection name / product title. So you'll want to be very careful when deleting products from a collection, or if your SEO expert wants to make changes to the canonical URLs. It probably couldn't hurt to occasionally run your pages through the Schema Markup Validator or the Rich Results Testing tool to make sure that these pages with the same content have the same structured data, because all 3 of these link to the exact same page. Fake reviews may make it past Google's bots, but if a human reviewer at Google determines the page is not compliant with their guidelines, you could be subject to a manual action from Google. In many cases, this could result in lower rankings or being removed from search results completely. Now, most people don't mean to do this, but combining reviews from another product because it's similar could get you into hot water. That's like creating fake reviews. If they're so similar, perhaps they should be variants of the product and not a standalone product. Site speed can definitely be a factor as well. If it takes a long time for the structured data to appear on the page, it may be too late for Google's bots, and Google has already moved on from your page.